Welcome, everyone. So we're going to talk about the founding of Tuxedo Park because this year is the 125th anniversary of the founding of the library. Next year, in 2027, is the 125th anniversary of the opening of the library. So I'm going to focus on the beginnings until the opening. Again, then we'll deal with the other one next year, and hopefully we'll organize an exhibition together at the Historical Society celebrating the 125th anniversary. Because this year we're celebrating the 125th anniversary of the school, TPS. We have the exhibition up at the moment. June the 14th, we were opening the 125th anniversary of the fire department. And so let's do a tripartite and do the library as well. So it's because of this plant we're all here today, which is nice for us, but ironically bad for so many others. Do you know what it is? Tobacco plant. That's a tobacco plant, yes. You see the leaves, it's responsible for the death and suffering of millions. So it's not actually grown here, but in the plantations in Kentucky and Virginia, owned by the Lorellards who founded Tuxedo Park. Their profits from the processing of this plant into snuff and cigarettes allowed them to buy the land around us, where Pierre Lorillard IV had the vision of creating a fishing and hunting club back in 1885. And so here's the bad boy, Pierre Lorillard IV. I don't think he realized at the time it was so bad. It was later on they were pulling wool over our eyes and all smoke and mirrors. Now, if you like old men with facial hair today, you're in for a treat, because there'll be a slew of these old men with beards. And if you don't, we'll be having a lot of architectural images. And if that's not your thing, I'll try and litter some anecdotes in between. So he had apparently become disenchanted in living in Newport and sold his cottage, the Breakers, to William Vanderbilt II. And so here's the Breakers as we know it now. So this is where William Vanderbilt was living, but this is what it was like before. This is when Pierre Lorillard owned it, and it was built in 1877 by Peabody and Stearns, and he sold this to Vanderbilt. It burned down, and Vanderbilt rebuilt it with this two-story villa of fireproof Indiana limestone by the architect Richard Morris Hunt. But that's the official story. The unofficial story, which I just heard from a lady that was living in Newport, and she said, no, it was the other way around. Newport was disenchanted with him, and he was chased out. So that's 2 strikes down for Pierre Lorillard IV. So let's see if he can redeem himself as we discuss the founding of the library, to see if we can, get back into our good graces. So Lorillard had engaged the landscape architect Ernest Bowditch for his property up in Newport. He was born in Brookline, Massachusetts. He studied chemistry and mining at MIT and left without a degree. One of his early jobs was the general maintenance of the Mount Auburn Cemetery, which was like a park. It was one of the first public parks. And so he laid out the gardens, driveways, paths, and curbing. And it was great because his clientele were all dead, so they were the easiest clients to have. And he worked with Frederick Law Olmsted Sr. and John Charles Olmsted as a surveyor and draftsman. So as a landscaper, he was involved with the design of neighboring estates as well. Vinland was owned by Lorillard's cousin, Catherine Lorillard Wolfe, who was a major art collector. And then also it was built by Peabody and Stearns. And then Wakehurst, owned by the Van Allens, which was an exact copy of Wakehurst in the heart of Sussex in England, which I was just at 3 days ago. I took my mom there. It's part of Kew Gardens. It's the wild botanic garden of Kew, and it's home to the Millennium Seed Bank. They store the seeds for future use. And get this, they did a native meadow. And guess who they got to do their native meadow? This is Kew Gardens in England. They brought over a chap from from Pennsylvania called Larry Weiner to do the meadow. Larry Weiner, we beat them to it. We got Larry Weiner over here to do the racetrack nature preserve at the racetrack. So there was a contractor, James Lomdieu, that was part of and then of course Bruce Price, the architect, but more on him later because he's our hero. So here's the proposed layout of the town. So this is the stable, which is now the town hall. We have we have the houses for the workers and families. We have stores, the general office of the TPA, stables, railway station, but no library yet. So construction starts with astonishing speed and quality over a very harsh winter. And then here you can see there. So on the right side, the TP building, that's the TP, the Tuxedo Park Association office. And then to the left of that, you see the stores. And then to the left of that, that's where the library is. But there's a house. So there was actually, so there's the stores, there's the TPA office. And then this is the model for one of the houses that was right here. So the library wasn't in a twinkle in anybody's eye. So and then there were cottages, other houses for the workers on the east side, and the laundry. This is where the school is now. That was keeping everyone nice and clean because it was tough work. And then here we go in 1886. Still no library. There's the lodge. If you look on the right, the lodge and the keep. So the entrance to Tuxedo Park is being built, and we were very fortunate to find these original drawings by Bruce Price very recently. They were part of the TPA archives, and so here it is, signed by Bruce Price, and there's the little I don't think the actual person that's drawn there is original. Can you see? I think someone put him in for scale later on to show how massive, how monumental it was. And in fact, here it is. So it was inspired, we think, by Désiré Charnay. He was an archaeologist, and under the auspices of the Peabody Museum, he was exploring the Yucatan. And the French government was supposed to pay him, but they didn't. So Pierre Lorillard stepped in and financed it. So he's redeemed himself a little bit. And so and there was actually a town called Lorillardville named after him because of that contribution. But this Mayan architecture, these massive stones, we think was influential in part of the structure of this work. So the plan was the park to be a preserve for hunting and fishing for a limited number of people, with a few cottages to be rented or sold. So unpretentious was the first thought that Mr. Lorillard invariably designated his cottages and houses as boxes. Gradually, the idea developed. Society took hold of the project, and it not only became popular but fashionable. In very short order, the clubhouse became a large building with a ballroom and 100 bedrooms, one bathroom, apparently, and boxes became country houses. And in the matter of architectural treatment, much was left to Bruce Price, and in the first 6 months after the project started, he designed and built 40 houses. And so this was his words back in 1899. So this is the beautiful wrought iron work and the attention to detail that is still there. Built it very well, same as Ernest Bowditch, the landscape architect, laying all the pipes and the dams, very top quality. So they're still functioning very well today. So there's the gates. They used to close them every night, and they're still there. So here's this was the building of the dam at the Wiwa. Now look at that, huh? So there's Circuit Road, Continental Road. What's that lake? Crumlin. Do we have a Crumlin Lake in Tuxedo Park? Exactly. So it's quite a mystery. So crumb is derived from the Old English word crump, which means bent or crooked, and linn is the word for lake or waterfall. So that's what it was originally called, and then they changed it to another interesting word, wee-wah. So they were sort of, there was a nostalgia for cultural heritage, and so they called it the wee-wah. And then the little part on the left, they were very original in calling it pond number 3. So, and here's the plan for this is the planting plan for the clubhouse grounds by Ernest Bowditch. So you can see that's the original club that was designed by Bruce Price, with the ballroom, the theatre, and the bowling alley. And at the bottom, you see Continental Road. And if you want to know more about the Continental Road, you go a few doors down to the Historical Society. We have an exhibition up at the moment about George Washington laying the Continental Road down to escape from the Brits while the War of Independence was on. And so here's the club designed by Bruce Price, which was destroyed in 1928, and then rebuilt. So the original one had a circular room, 75 feet in diameter, with an inlaid floor of extraordinary workmanship. The claim had been made that it was the handsomest ballroom in the United States. And one thing they say, from every beam is suspended a chandelier of 25 candlestick gas lights. Well, we don't have gas supplied in the park at the moment, so I don't think they had it back then. So I'm not sure where that came from. But anyway, people were brought from the station by the jiggers. So they were horse-drawn, and then there were automobiles later on. From the railway station, which in Wikipedia says it was designed by Bruce Price. It was designed by the Office of the Engineer of the New York, Lackawanna, Erie, and Western Railroad. And it's not, and you'll see it's not unique. I mean, you'll see it at the Botanical Gardens, and then when they have the Christmas Railway Show for kids, they have a little miniature version of it. But Suffern Railway Station, before it was demolished, was very similar to this. Apparently, they had the idea to do another type of Tuxedo Park over there, so they wanted a fancy railway station. So it was kind of like a kit, I guess. And so it's not unique, but it is a lovely railway station. So the folks in Tuxedo were either working hard or playing hard, and with not much time for literary pursuits. And so still no need for a library. And as you can see from this map in 1987, there's still no library. There's more houses, more infrastructure. So let's look around. Let's see what was happening elsewhere to see if there's any clues about the libraries. So most libraries were named after a major donor. And as far as libraries are concerned, the name Andrew Carnegie stands head and shoulders above all others. So here he is, a Scottish-American businessman and philanthropist. He immigrated from Dunfermline in Scotland to Pittsburgh with his parents in 1848 at the age of 12, and rose from a poor immigrant weaver's son to become the richest man in the world. He revolutionized the steel industry and helped build the infrastructure of modern America. Furthermore, he set a new standard for philanthropy that billionaires still follow today. Not all billionaires, but a few. Consequently, his name remains legendary in libraries and concert halls around the world. So this is the first one he did, the Carnegie Free Library of Braddock, Pennsylvania in 1889. And guess how many? 2,509 libraries he built. And he had a very clever plan. He believed in giving to the industrious and ambitious, not those who need everything done for them, but those who, being most anxious and able to help themselves, deserve and will be benefited by help from others. Likewise, local municipalities had to participate and share in the running cost. So there was buy-in there. Many criteria were set, and in the interests of efficiency, fireplaces were discouraged, since that wall space could be used to house more books. So here's our fireplace upstairs, one of 3. How many do we have? 4. One of 4. So we weren't a Carnegie Library. Even though he's buried not too far from me, he's buried in Sleepy Hollow Cemetery, which we'll go and see. So other libraries are named to honor someone. For example, a library that's close to us, the Rushmore Memorial Library up in Woodbury, which now houses the Woodbury Historical Society, whose president doubles as the town of Tuxedo historian, Alex Brzezinskis. So Charles Rushmore died in 1931, and 8 years later, the library would be formally renamed in his memory, as he'd originally donated the funds for it to be built. Now, Rushmore may ring a bell. There's a book over there written by Rushmore. He was the doctor, the first doctor here in the park, and his son wrote that book. But no, it wasn't that Rushmore. It was another Rushmore. It was the Mount Rushmore. Now, you think he must be pretty swanky to have that presidential monument that was carved by Gutzon Borglum in 1927 to 1941 with the help of his son. And the sculptures feature 60-foot-tall depictions of the heads of 4 United States presidents: George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Theodore Roosevelt, and Abraham Lincoln, respectively chosen to represent the nation's foundation, expansion, development, and preservation. So why was it called Mount Rushmore? Well, it was owned by the Harney Peak Tin Company before all this. And this New York attorney, Charles Rushmore, used to visit the Black Hills out there in South Dakota over the period of 1884 to 1885 to protect the company's land claims for prospecting. And one day he pointed to the mountain and said, "What's that called?" And they said, "Well, it has no name." And the chap said, "We'll call it after you, Mount Rushmore." And so that stuck. And then it was officially recognized by the United States Board of Geographic Names in June 1930. So there's the Rushmore Memorial Library. There's Mount Rushmore. So let's talk about the Lenox Library. So the Lenox Library was in 1877. This was short-lived. It was for James Lenox, and it was more of a museum. So it was his private collection of rare books. You had to make an appointment to go, but it was done by Richard Morris Hunt. He was the architect that did the breakers. He was the go-to architect, and famous and very well loved, and so much so that they decided to do a monument in his honor. So opposite this is on Fifth Avenue between 70th and 71st Street. Opposite, they did a monument in honor of Richard Morris Hunt. And Bruce Price, our guy, was asked to do that. Well, the monument's still there, but guess what? This library was demolished a few years later. Can you believe it? But you won't be. There's a silver lining to this. Guess what's there now? The Frick collection, so the museum and the Frick Art Reference Library, which is a fantastic recourse for art historians. And I remember the first time I used to go there when I was at Sotheby's to do research. They just changed the rules that ladies, up till then, they had to wear dresses. If a lady came with trousers, she was not allowed to do research at the Frick Art Reference Library. Yeah. So anyway, so that was. So let's skip forward. Otherwise, so there's the memorial that's still there that Bruce Price did, which cost more than this library. Wow. This was about $20,000 to do this, and so it represents sculpture and architecture. And then I didn't even put him in the middle. So there we go. There's the Frick collection. So that's the Russell Page Garden, and with the new wing. So the new wing is just finished. So the Frick, when it was redone from the home into a museum, was done by the architect John Russell Pope, who did the second version of our club, which then burned down. And this will be a recurring theme in Tuxedo, the fires. So the rebuilding of the club was done by the architects Walker and Gillette. And Walker was married to one of the founders of this library, Grenville Kane. So one of Grenville Kane's daughters married Walker. And so it was all, you'll see, it's all one big happy family. So let's talk about Bruce Price. So he was born in Cumberland, Maryland, and grew up in Baltimore. He was going to Princeton, but then his father died, so he had to leave. He worked with a couple of architectural companies and opened his own office in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, where he practiced from 1873 to 1876. Then he moved to New York in 1877. He became known as an innovator of the shingle style. So here's the house which still exists, the Finley House it's called. It's later owned by one of the Astor orphans, Winthrop Astor Chandler. And so this sort of stark geometric and compact massing of these cottages actually influenced some modernist architectures, including Frank Lloyd Wright. So in the beginning, the architect's idea was to fit buildings within the surrounding woods. So they were very dark shingle wood. He was very respectful of the environment. Even with some of the larger mansions he built later, he followed the terrain and topography. So there's one house in the park called Boulder Point, and it actually has part of the boulder still in the house, highlighted, and which serves as a reminder that we're just visitors and stewards while we're here, and so we should leave this place where we are in at least good or better condition when we leave. He regarded Tuxedo Park as one of his most important achievements. And he designed railway cars as well. So this is a bay window parlor car for the Pennsylvania Railroad that he designed in 1885, which is quite, and then of course he designed the hotels and railway stations. This is in Quebec, and there it is, Chateau Frontenac. And he also designed other public buildings in that Richardsonian Romanesque style. So this is another, this is like a sister library to us. This is the Hotchkiss Library in Sharon, Connecticut, designed by Bruce Price. You can see that same, and here's a picture of it. Look, snap! It has those wonderful, rounded end windows, as well like the one we have. So community urban planning was also on his radar and drawing boards. This is an amazing place. It's called Strivers Row. It's in Manhattan on West 138th Street, and it's pretty intact, as you can see. So with the architect Clarence Luce, he designed this yellow brick and limestone townhomes, and they had these gates in between for the horses and the stables. And interestingly enough, we'll tell Jerry Howard this, Strivers Row, which is what it's called, is also the name that Penguin Random House Publishing Company used for their publishing imprint created to elevate African-American writers. So next time you see Jerry, ask him that to see if he's on the ball. He also, Bruce Price, our guy, built among the earliest high-rise office buildings. So this is one of his most important works, the St. James Building. And there were 5 houses he designed for himself. So this one is the Emily Post Cottage. It's known famously because he designed it. He built 4 of these, and where his daughter ended up living, Emily Post. So his good DNA was inherited by her. She published many books on etiquette, which are still relevant today and are continually being updated to reflect our ever-changing current circumstances. Basically, she encouraged respect for one another. Her descendants continue her work and keep the flame burning as bright, as relevant as possible. As you can see in this dedication here of the book, the Centennial Edition, which was published just a few years ago, they dedicated it not about respect to other people, but for the environment, let us take good care. And email, all sorts of things. They're very up to date with etiquette in today's modern world. And but reports on Emily's wedding was that it was when her wedding celebration was not, it was by the lake. And so Emily Post Cottage is not by the lake. This is the site where the first Bruce Price was. So there's the newish house there, but you can see on the left the ice house, and you can see those wonderful old walls, which was the zigzagging path going up to the boathouse, up to the house. So we know this was the site of Bruce Price's house. So, I got very excited about this because there was no documentation, no images. No one had ever seen a picture of Bruce Price's house. So that was like a red flag to me. So this is what we did find. We found, look, snap. This was the house site. This was the sketch of this same footprint of the And look, this was the inspiration. Now, does that look familiar? That's his house in Maryland. There you go. That's his childhood house. So that resurfaced many times. So Bruce Price's house. So here's this lovely little picture, and so I know I can see the Breeze's house on the left at the far back there, and you're on the Westlake Road here. So the Breeze's house is it here? There we go. That's the Breezes there. And so I know that here, this is where, there's the ice house, there's the zigzag walls going up. So that is Bruce Price's house. So this is the only image. So what I did is, so there we go. I magnified it so you can see this like a TP thing. So what we did is I asked Mr. Artificial Intelligence if he could help. So I gave him this image and said, what do you think? So that he came up with this. So I thought, well, that's not quite it. So I said, listen, make a bigger effort, think channel Bruce Price. And he came up with this, which is much more. I like it. Yeah, that's much more. So it has that wonderful porch going around. And there you see on the left, that wonderful semicircular trademark of Bruce Price. So that's yeah. So that's but that's just a mock-up. So we've got to be very careful with this, that this doesn't go out into the ether saying this is his house, because it's not. It's So we still don't have the library. Bruce Price has been building around. So how does it happen? It's another Price, Hiram Price Collier. Price was his middle name, but he dropped the Hiram, so he went by Price Collier. So he lived here in Tuxedo Park, and he married that lady that's standing up there. So that's Cassie. That's Sarah next to her. So that's Sarah Delano. So the Delano family were raised up not too far from here, up in Balmville in Newburgh. And so Sarah married, I believe that's correct. So, and their son was called Franklin, and he became, and I think Franklin came here to Tuxedo Park when he was age 14 to St. Mary's. He was the godfather, the baptism of one of his cousins, and in St. Mary's. So the Delano sisters were raised up in a place called Algonac. That was the name of the house, their estate. And so there's Franklin, Eleanor, and Warren, the grandfather, and Sarah Delano Roosevelt. And next to them lived a lady called Natalie Knowlton. Does that ring a bell? Knowlton. Natalie married a Mr. Blair. Does that ring a bell? John Inslee Blair. So, and they built Blair, which is now Blairhaven, which is now the school. So they live next to each other up in Balmville. So there is the lady that owns the house of the Knowltons. She's agreed for us to go and visit. So we're going to do a Tuxedo Historical Society visit up there to see her childhood home, which will be fascinating. But so there's Algonac, there's the Newburgh, the Delano family home, and there's Blairhaven, which the daughter, Joan Blair Overton, donated to the school in 1957. So here's Bruce Price's house. Guess who? Price Collier's house, designed by Bruce Price. So he was here, and so he was the one that decided we need a library, for God's sake. We don't have one. So he was the one that initiated. So he had a meeting here in his Georgian-styled house in June 3rd, 1901, and he called around his literary and rich friends to get some money together. He'd already found the architect, Bruce Price, and he'd already started making arrangements to get that damn house moved to create so that we could have the library here. And so on November the 3rd, the library constitution was outlined and the fundraising began. So, of course, he asked George F. Baker for some money, and he obliged. I think he gave $1,000. He was the president of the First National Bank, and his grandson, George Baker St. George, actually married Catherine, the daughter of Price Collier. And his granddaughter married Edwin Main Post Jr., Ned. That was the son of Emily Post and grandson of Bruce Price. And his son, George F. Baker Jr., married Edith Kane. She was the daughter of another trustee, Grenville Kane. In turn, their daughter married the son of Thomas Suffern Taylor, whose father was married to Maud Lorillard. So it's very incestuous. Anyway, so he knew them all. It was a big family affair. And George Baker already knew Bruce Price, the architect, because Bruce had built a house for him in Seabright, New Jersey, called Seaverge, which was an interesting name. The most interesting name I've ever come across for a house facing the sea is an author belonging to an author, David Sedaris. Do you know the name of his house?
It's got to be funny.
C-section. And here a lot of the houses have names. Most of them are something to do with rock. They're Ridge Rock, Rock Ridge, or Saddle Rock, or Rock Ledge. My house, the little house that I bought, was, when we purchased it, was called Stone's Throw, because it's a stone's throw from the lake. I thought that was a little bit too cute. And at the time, there was a mini scandal in Tuxedo Park, and the front page of the newspaper said, "Scandal rocks Tuxedo Park." So I said, there's the name of our house, Scandal Rocks. Anyway, so George F. Baker, he'd bought actually Pierre Lorilard's house, his original house, that surprisingly was not built by Bruce Price, but by James Brown Lord, an architect who built quite a few houses here in Tuxedo, and actually lived here as well as the other architect, Howland Hunt, the son of Richard Morris Hunt. So here was his house. This is Seaverge in this community. It's just south of Rumson in New Jersey. It was quite grand in those for a nanosecond, and then it kind of went downhill. Here's the house that Pierre Lorillard built and lived in for a nanosecond, and then sold it to George F. Baker. And here's the school. So he gave a lot of money to fund the school, which was based on. See the similarity? So this was the library at the Harvard Business School, where he gave $5 million. He gave $1,000 to the library. And when he died, his fortune in 1931, his fortune was estimated to be $73 million. Yeah. So here's the house in New York, and with a beautiful courtyard, and there is. And it's interesting. There's that courtyard. It's bricked off. Now it's you can drive in with cars, and look at that car on the right. I don't think that's his, because this was his car, which was interesting. It was custom made to be taller, so he could keep his top hat on inside the car, which is interesting because Adele Colgate's brother, Adele Colgate from the park, her brother did the same thing. He had an extra high car, which was a bitch to sell apparently when he died. No one wanted this extra high car, but this was begin. So here's a close up of that image you saw before of the gate, and look at the sign at the bottom: entrance Tuxedo for automobiles, North Gate. So this was in 1907. They were still very uncomfortable about automobiles. They had to come through the North Gate, and they couldn't go more than 10 miles an hour. And it was quite. And so there were sleighs, and so here we go. Here's the perfect juxtaposition of the automobile age. So this is Emily Davis, the mother of Jackie Cornfeld. Yes. So there's the horse and it was there were many martyrs to the automobile age. Bruce Price's wife, she was killed in an auto accident. She was driving to Arden to see the Harrimans. They just finished Arden and had a car accident and died in 1909. So So the community took to the new development of progress with differing levels of enthusiasm. So here's Grenville Kane. So he was one of the trustees, the founding trustees of the library. And though he was very supportive of this new library, he was still the last to get his own house in order. He was the last one to have a telephone. He was the last one to have his house electrified, much to the consternation of his 5 daughters. So as I said, his daughter married George F. Baker's son, and Edith Kane, his daughter, made possible the donation of his library to Princeton. So he had a pretty important library. There's his house, which is still this is the top of Tower Hill. And so one of his important works is a manuscript atlas from the 16th century. And there is his upper left there. You see his ex libris, Grenville Kane. And so he had an important library. And that little house there still exists. And that was the playhouse for his daughters. It's not in, now it's in a different location, but it's still there in the park. And there was also another little house for somebody else's daughters. So this is the children's tea house. So this was of the daughters of Charles Beatty Alexander. So he was another big donor for the establishing of the library. And he married Harriet Crocker Alexander. And Harriet Crocker. And so she became Mrs. Alexander. And she was a gold heiress from the California coast. So there she is with one of the kids. And there's the house that they built. So this house, let me see. This is what it looks like from the lake. And so you can maybe, it's no longer there, but you see that tea house on the lower right? That's still there. And if you go up, you see the ramparts, the supports sticking out. They're still there. And then there's a newer house that the Currys built. But there it is. That's the Alexander cottage. So the house was, a little bit of a Gilded Age monstrosity. And look at that. These are the gardens. So these are the gardens. So on the other side of the road, they had these magnificent gardens with beautiful potting sheds, and greenhouses, and stables. And look, so this is the fountain that was there. It's sort of grown over that area. And look in the far back, in the back, you can see that tower sticking up. Let's focus. Look. So the tower has disappeared. That wing on the right is still there. That house was sold recently. All the part on the left is gone. And, we know the carriage house up by the Mason House up on Summit, a big carriage house that was restored. This is even bigger than that. So a huge carriage house. And then her brother built this house. Has anyone ever seen this house? This is in Marwa. And it belonged to, it's still there, it's for sale, because the guy that just bought it, it was listed for $48 million, the most expensive house in New Jersey. And a guy bought it, a Chinese chap, I forget his name. He was the one that had the boat that Steve Bannon was arrested on. And then he was caught for felony, and so the government owned this, and now they're trying to sell it. All the land around it has been, McMansions have gone up. So that's the inside of it there, if you're interested. And so here we go, Richard Mortimer. So he was an American real estate investor and society leader, another donor to the library. So this was his house, Mortimer, with beautiful gardens as well. And guess who built it? Richard Howland Hunt. And 54-room villa in the Italian style. I don't think that's very Italian. It's more Tudor. So this was done in 1905. So this is where, let me show you this. There's the entrance drive, and that's what it is at the moment. So Bob Klemecki, this is Bob Klemecki's garden. So the Christiansons' house, those modern tech houses, it's on Ridge Road. So when you're going on East Lake Road, well, here's the entranceway. You see this.
Top of Ridge?
The bottom of Ridge and East Lake Road, and the lake is there. There's quite a grand entranceway.
Oh, I know where you first go up.
Yeah, and with these lions, and it goes to a modernish house, which was interesting. That sold recently, which is where Roosevelt's son lived, John Aspinall Roosevelt. So the driveway would zig, zag up to the top, just under Chu Yin's house, the Keach house, and we'd have this big. You'll see in a minute where it's situated with the other houses. So that burned down. His book collection burned, and it was more water damage that ruined the books than the actual fire. And the remnants of the house, a lot at the church, the marble hearthstone was used to cut down to make an altar in the chapel of the Holy Spirit below St. Mary's, and all around the garden in the rectory there's bits from the garden. So Henry William Poor, so he built Woodlands, or the Poor House, and this design philosophy of Bruce Price and Bowditch had been turned upside down and inside out by now, because the Bruce Price era, the purpose of a house is not to be seen but to see from, whereas these houses were like, look at me. And the gardens, oh my gosh, the retaining walls with a drone or an aerial image, you see the old pathways like that. Because what happened was there were all the fountains and things. So when this was given by Hans Christian Sonny, purchased it when it was and gave it to the school. And so the school kids, they needed football fields, whatever. So they got rid of all the statuary and grassed over the paths over. The glass houses were given to the abates in Sloatsburg, which came back to another garden where that playhouse of Grenville Cane was. And so there's here's the inspiration for the house. So this is Blickling in Norfolk. So that inspired part of the architecture outside, but mainly the staircase. So this is Haddon Hall in Derbyshire. There's Haddon Hall. Look at the ceiling, and then that inspired the ceiling of the Poor House. There was a library, but it was so he was, and there's the gardens again. So Henry Poor, he was the publisher of the Poor's Manual and for railways. He had to sell. He sold his house to financial problems. He sold his house to Tilford, and he had to sell his library to pay off creditors. And then he died in 1915. And Mr. Poor was very poor. He owed $2 million. So this is Tommy Suffern Taylor. So it's interesting. His father was a dry goods merchant and banker whose diaries and scrapbooks have been widely used by academics to document the financial history. So he married Pierre Laurillard, bad boy Pierre Laurillard, his daughter Maud. So they had the house built up on. Let's see, where is it? There, that house. They had that house built, and they had a child, and Tommy. So there he is, and there's Maud, and he was a fanatic of court tennis. So he brought his Suffern Taylor brought his friend Cecil Baring over from England, who actually worked in New York at the time, and they built a court for tennis building they commissioned the architectural firm Warren and Wetmore. And so it opened on December 30th, 1899. And so they had a match. It was Baring and Taylor. Taylor won the match 2-0. I think that's right. I'm not sure how you calculate court tennis, but anyway, Taylor won. But guess what he lost? He lost the love of his wife. Maud ran off with Cecil Baring. So she bolted. She couldn't stay in Tuxedo. She couldn't even stay in the States. So she went to this island off Dublin called Lamb Bay. And guess what? They built a court tennis there, which still exists. And so the house became, you can see there's that. And see, look, residence of J. Henry Smith. He's the guy that's known as Silent Smith. So he had a lot of money. And it was interesting. His wife was Anne Armstrong. And there's not much known about her except she had 3 husbands. So Silent Smith was one, and then the second one was William Rhinelander Stewart, a prominent New York family, And but there's not much information about him in Tuxedo apart from that he was married to her. But he was the one that was the most generous in building the library. He gave $3,000. They were raised about $15,000 or $18,000, and he gave $3,000. So head and shoulders above everyone else. Anyway, let's move forward. And so Silent Smith purchased William Whitney's house in New York with a fantastic ballroom and library. And then when he died, his nephew inherited, and George Grant Mason, and he sold it back to the Whitneys. So there's William Rhinelander Stewart. Now we come to a lady. So this is Eloise Breeze. Her nickname was Pussy, and here she is. And here's her house. But if you look, no library. So this is opposite the Breezes. The Breezes was her brother's house. And it was interesting because it was so James Brown Lord did this house. She was the first woman member of the club. She wasn't the Dollar Princess. That was her niece, the other Eloise Breeze, who married Lord Willoughby of Eresby, and was one of those dollar princesses that lots of money marry an English noble with a title, and so her uncle actually was Samuel Finley Breeze Morse. He was, let's see, so there's Pussy's house, and there's Samuel. That was her uncle. He was the father of the telegraph, and Morse code, which he developed because his wife was up in where was she? She was giving birth and had a problem. He was down in Washington, received news that she was suffering. By the time he got up there to see her, she was dead. So he thought there must be a better way of communicating, and that was the impetus of developing this, fast, long-distance communication. Also, the Breezes were related through her brother James Breeze, to the Potter family. Now, the Potter family are huge in Tuxedo, in my opinion, because Mr. Potter, James Brown Potter, who didn't give any money to the library, but this is interesting, his wife was an actress, Cora Urquhart. She was a beauty, and they went to London, and they met the Prince of Wales, Edward VII at the time. He took a fancy to her and said, "Why don't y'all come to Sandringham for the weekend?" And that's when, thanks to Mary Rose's husband, who documented all this, that he asked her, "Well, what's the dress code?" He said, "Well, go to Henry Poole in Savile Row, and he'll tell you what the Prince of Wales likes. He doesn't like the tails. He likes this short jacket, almost like a mess dress." And so that's when James Brown Potter had that made. He came back to Tuxedo. His wife stayed in London. Say no more. But he came back, and then people copied. His friends copied it. They went to Delmonico's, and everyone looked and said, "Oh my gosh, what are they wearing?" Oh, that's what they wear in Tuxedo, and that's how the appellation Tuxedo came for the dinner jacket. The other interesting side about so that's huge. That's big story. The other interesting thing was his wife's uncle was the Bishop of New York, and the other uncle was William Appleton Potter. He was an architect who built St. Mary's. Wow. So the Potters, a big deal. So James Breed, his brother, was a crazy guy and had all these amazing parties, using lighting people on fire, using champagne to put the fire out, having naked girls come out of big pies, and so let's so there's there we go. There's St. Mary's. There she is. So that's when she was the actress in London, and there's James Lawrence Breeze. There's the Breezes, which still exists. And this is the house where James Lawrence Breeze lived in while that was being built. This was a wonderful house built by Bruce Price, which burned down. It belonged to Richard Delafield, another donor. It burned down, and his library got burned, and it was replaced with another building where the Hennessy's live now on Westlake Road. There's Richard Delafield. And so the Frederick de Peyster Foster, he moved into the Breezes because James Breeze moved in and he breezed out. He wasn't there for very long. So he lived there, and And then this is where he moved to. So this is the crypt that he crept into. So inside, the rumor was there was a telephone,
For
to speak to God. And so when Father Rick came here, I said, Father Rick, come on, let's go in and check this out. So we went in. He found the big key. We went in, and we didn't find a phone. And then we thought that his wife was buried there as well, and his son, Richmond Talbot. But we just found the sarcophagus of one of them. So it's I don't know where the others scurried off to, but according to the records, they're supposed to be there. But so that was the Frederick de Peyster Foster. Paul Tuckerman, he was another. He became the secretary and director of the Tuxedo. This house still exists on Circuit Road. And his daughter was Dorothy Draper. So this is Dorothy Draper, and this is the type of architecture we did. This was at the Metropolitan Museum before they ruined it. So this was the fountains, and all that's gone now. And so that was Paul Tuckerman's daughter, and then the Juilliards. So the Augustus Juilliard, and then his nephew. He wasn't married. The nephew, and they lived in this mansion at the bottom there, on East Lake Road. No, it was actually destroyed. It was demolished. It was £15,000 to demolish it. Hans Christian Sonny tried to save it, but he couldn't. And then there's the boathouse, which still exists, and Amos Tuck French. Now look at that, beautiful. That's up on Cliff Road. It doesn't exist anymore, but there's his house to the left, and there's his own library to the right. It's like the Bridge of Sighs connecting them to him. So he was a great collector of books, and then his daughter was married, and it was to their chauffeur. So the announcement in the paper was Miss Julia French was married Wednesday to a man unknown to her family. Jack was his name, Geherty. And it's funny because, and so then his 10,000 book collection was donated to Dartmouth College on his desk. His son, Frankie, he became a taxi driver. And then his child then got back up to her social standing. She married a guest, Raymond Richard Guest, and then John Astor VI. So she redeemed herself. And they called them the divorcing Frenches because of their many and numerous divorces. And Spencer Trask, so there's the taxi driver. There's Frank. And Spencer Trask, he was he built this house that still exists called the Villa. And so he also had this house. They built this house in Saratoga Springs, which became Yaddo, the literary retreat. I think, I'm not sure whether it's this version or the second version. And then Barbet, interesting. That's his house. Bruce Price, classic. This is a rumor that they were in Switzerland, and they gave the dimensions, what they wanted, of the house to Bruce Price. And it was in centimeters, and the house was built in inches. So that's why it's too massive. She hated it because it was much too big, what that she wanted, and it didn't last for long. But look, you had a hall, a dining room, and a library. Wow. One of the few. Now here we go. This was the Alexander House. So the lake is here, demolished. This was Mortimer. This was Colonel Keach's house, demolished, and on the remains of it is a new house. This house is where Cindy Booth's house is, the Halsey house. This house is still existing. That's Glenn Young's house, the one on stilts on Tower Hill Loop. And this house was Barbet House number 2. The house that I just showed you was replaced with that. And now the third one is the one that Mr. Whitty owns that built. So that's how Tuxedo Park looked in the Gilded Age of like, look at me, I've got so much money. Here's the Halsey house. This was torn down, yeah. I don't think it was burned. When he built it, and they remain still, you see on that gate on H for Halsey, when he bought that land, he had there were two houses. One belongs to Charlene Cathcart, was moved all the way to Pepperidge Road. The other one belonged to the Bartletts, was moved with hundreds of horses and people to Continental Road. And as Jack said, so that's 1, 2. The teepee house we showed you earlier on, one of Bruce Bryce's early ones, that was up on the top of the hill, moved downhill. So that's number 3. And then the other one was by the court tennis, where Dolores the Marchands live. That used to be a Bruce Bryce house on the water. And then William Garrison moved it to the other side of the road. And then the other one, the 5th one, was the Astor Hunting Lodge that William Waldorf Astor had built. When the Juilliards bought his property, they moved his hunting lodge to the other side of the road, which still is there, and then they built their house. So, hundreds of horses and men, you can do anything. And then Robert Fulton Cutting. And then Charles Patterson, he was our supervisor. So he was on the board as well. He didn't donate the money, but he was on the trustees board. And this is his house that still exists on Route 17, opposite Augusta Furnace. So there's Charles Patterson. He married Edith, and Gilmore Bush was the policeman here, and he married Harriet. Edith and Harriet were sisters, so it was like, and their maiden name was Daters, so they were double daters. And other libraries that just as we close up. So this is a beautiful library that was part of the Wagstaff estate. The Wagstaff house burned down, but because the library wasn't contiguous, it didn't burn. It was already empty of books because the Wagstaff had sold the house already. And this is the inside. It's owned by Howard Shaw now, where he composes. And look, does anyone recognize this chap? This is a huge literary person. And his wife, Clarisse Coudert, was her name. She lived in the house at the bottom of Clubhouse Road and Continental Road. And she was married to Condé Nast. That's Condé Nast. Yeah. And they had a son born in Tuxedo Park and a daughter called Natica, like Natica Blair. He has and he was a member of the club, and but he's like the best kept secret. And there's William Waldorf Astor, and so he was a publisher, and he wrote this little book for the club, the historical names of the Tuxedo region. So it's all about the origin of the name Tuxedo, and then the other literary person was Mark Twain or Samuel Clements at the Voss House. And then, so the library opened, but I'm not going to go into that because that'll be for the next time. So there was a bowling alley. There it is. And there, so I'll end with this. This is in 1915 where it survived the blizzard and the storm, and so my question to y'all is, if we were going to rename the library from Tuxedo Park Library, what would you call it? I would call it the Tuxedo Price Library, in honor of Bruce Price, the architect who built it, and Price Collier, the gentleman that funded it. And there we have it. The price is right. Yeah.